The pen trembled in Aarav Khanna's hand as the final page slid toward him, the sunlight from the office window cutting sharply across the paper like a warning he couldn't quite read. His daughter's small fingers clung to his sleeve, her presence the only thing grounding him as three suited men watched in silence, waiting for him to surrender everything. In that moment, it didn't feel like signing a document, it felt like erasing his life. And yet, with a heavy breath, he signed. Because sometimes, when the world corners you, survival looks a lot like defeat. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us of humanity, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. Aarav had never imagined his life would collapse so quickly. Just 2 years earlier, his mornings had been filled with the quiet laughter of his wife Mira, sunlight pouring into their modest apartment, and the steady rhythm of a life built on hard work and hope. But illness came like a storm with no warning, taking Mira away and leaving Aarav alone with their 6-year-old daughter, Sanvi. Grief didn't give him time to breathe, responsibilities piled on relentlessly, and the small business he had once nurtured began to crumble under the weight of hospital bills and mounting debt. By the time the men from Virex Holdings arrived, Aarav was already exhausted beyond reason. They came with polite smiles and carefully worded sympathy, offering a solution wrapped in urgency. They spoke of debts, legal actions, and consequences that would leave him with nothing, not even the small apartment he called home. Their offer was simple: sign over his remaining assets, his business rights, and any future claims in exchange for clearing his debts and allowing him to keep a portion of his savings to start over. It sounded cruel, but it also sounded like survival. That morning, Aarav had barely slept. Sanvi had woken from a nightmare, whispering fears about losing him too. He held her until dawn, promising things he wasn't sure he could deliver. And now here he was, faced with a choice that felt like breaking that promise. The office was too quiet when he signed. No one celebrated, no one acknowledged the gravity of what had just happened. The men simply collected the papers, nodded, and left. Aarav sat there long after they were gone, staring at the empty space where his future used to be. Sanvi looked up at him, her eyes searching for reassurance. He forced a smile, though it felt like it might shatter at any moment. Days passed in a strange blur. Aarav tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy, taking up small jobs, anything that would keep food on the table. The world outside didn't care about his loss, it moved forward relentlessly. But inside him, something remained unsettled, like a quiet voice refusing to be silenced. It began with a phone call. A man introduced himself as Raghav Bedi, a junior legal assistant who had worked on Aarav's case. His voice carried a nervous urgency, as though he was stepping into something dangerous. He asked Aarav if he had read every clause of the agreement before signing. Aarav admitted he hadn't. There had been too many pages, too much pressure, too little time. Raghav hesitated before explaining that while reviewing archived documents, he had noticed something unusual. A clause buried deep within the agreement, written in dense legal language, had been overlooked by everyone involved. It wasn't just a technicality, it was a condition that could change everything. Aarav didn't understand at first. How could something so important go unnoticed? But as Raghav explained further, a fragile hope began to take shape. The clause stated that if Virex Holdings failed to utilize or develop the acquired business assets within a specified timeframe, ownership would automatically revert to the original holder, Aarav himself. Not only that, but any profits generated during that period would also be subject to compensation. The catch was simple yet profound: the company had to actively operate the business. And according to Raghav, they hadn't. Aarav felt his heart race for the first time in weeks. It seemed impossible, almost too good to be true. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. The clause was real, legally binding, and enforceable. It had been overlooked because everyone assumed Aarav would never challenge the agreement. That night, Aarav sat at the small kitchen table, the document spread out before him. Sanvi slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the storm quietly turning in her father's mind. For the first time since Mira's passing, Aarav felt something he thought he had lost forever: determination. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal consultations and preparation. Raghav connected Aarav with a senior lawyer willing to take the case, intrigued by the rare opportunity. It wasn't going to be easy. Virex Holdings was powerful, well-connected, and unlikely to relinquish anything without a fight. But the law was on Aarav's side, and that was something they couldn't ignore. When the notice was served, it sent shockwaves through the company. What they had dismissed as a completed transaction suddenly became a looming legal threat. Meetings were called, strategies discussed, but one thing became clear: they had underestimated Aarav. The court proceedings were intense. Aarav sat quietly as arguments were presented, his life dissected in legal terms. The opposing lawyers tried to portray him as negligent, someone who had willingly signed away his rights. But the clause spoke for itself, clear and undeniable. Days turned into weeks, each one filled with tension and uncertainty. Aarav carried the weight of it all, trying to remain strong for Sanvi, who sensed the change in him. She began to smile more, as if she could feel hope returning to their lives. Then came the day of the verdict. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the decision. The clause was valid, enforceable, and binding. Virex Holdings had failed to meet its obligations, and as a result, ownership of the business and its assets would revert to Aarav Khanna. Additionally, the company was ordered to compensate him for damages and lost opportunities. For a moment, Aarav couldn't breathe. The words echoed in his mind, too powerful to fully grasp. It wasn't just a victory, it was a restoration of everything he thought he had lost. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight felt different, warmer somehow. Aarav looked down at Sanvi, who beamed up at him with pure joy. In her eyes, he saw not just relief, but pride. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. Rebuilding the business took time, effort, and resilience. But Aarav approached it with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just working for survival anymore, he was building a future for his daughter, one rooted in strength and integrity. The experience changed him in ways he hadn't expected. He became more aware, more cautious, but also more compassionate. He understood what it meant to be vulnerable, to be pushed to the edge, and to find a way back. Months later, as Aarav stood in his newly restored office, he reflected on the journey. The same sunlight that once felt harsh and unforgiving now filled the space with warmth and possibility. Sanvi sat nearby, drawing pictures, her laughter echoing softly. He realized that the clause, the one no one noticed, wasn't just a legal detail. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there can be hidden paths waiting to be discovered. Sometimes, hope exists in places we never think to look. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even in the hardest times there is a chance for things to change, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Your support helps spread stories that matter. And before we end, here's a special request: comment the word hope if you believe that even the smallest chance can change everything. Aarav's story didn't end with that victory, it began there. Because true strength isn't about never falling, it's about finding the courage to stand again, even when the world expects you to stay down.